Why am I coming out of retirement to contest this riding? Because I feel compelled to speak out in defense of the vital social programs that we enjoy today. Programs that we now enjoy thanks to the dedication and the fortitude of members of the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, the CCF, and its successor, the New Democratic Party. A bit of history now. When Liberal Prime Minister Mackenzie King lacked a majority in the House of Commons in 1926, he secured the support of two CCF MPs from Winnipeg, J.S. Woodsworth and A.A. Heaps, who obtained a commitment in writing from Mr. Mackenzie King to introduce old age pensions. When Liberal leader Lester Pearson in the 1960s lacked a clear majority in the House of Commons, he obtained support from the NDP members of Parliament by establishing the Canada Pension Plan. And we have the benefit today of a national health plan because the CCF government in Saskatchewan, headed by Tommy Douglas, established a provincial health plan, a plan that led the way to the national plan we now enjoy. The Harper Party doesn't believe in, nor will it long tolerate, public programs. Mr. Harper's philosophy is that government regulation of any nature is to be minimal, if it exists at all. Private enterprise and the marketplace will look after all of us. He looks to the United States as his model for good government. He sees himself as more of a president than a prime minister. When in opposition in Parliament, he called for more openness and accountability from government. His actions in government are totally the opposite. In opposition, he called for more effective role for parliamentary committees. In government, when his committee members couldn't defeat opposition members' motions, he had his members walk out and thus end the meeting. Stephen Harper is my real opponent in Provencher. I say this because he controls the actions of all his ministers. And Vic Taves is no exception. Everything they say or do is carefully watched and screened by his office. I became interested in politics in the 1940s when I heard Stanley Knowles and Lloyd Stinson, both clergymen, speak of the social gospel and the need to build a society on the Christian principles of love and social justice. Stephen Harper is a man whose social values and political objectives are dangerous. If he were to get a majority government, he would open wide the door to private, for-profit health systems. In 1997, Stephen Harper, then vice president of the National Citizens Coalition, said, quote, "It's past time the Fed scrapped the Canada Health Act," end of quote. Then in 2001, as president of the National Citizens Coalition, he said this, and I quote, "What we clearly need is experimentation with market reforms and private delivery options in healthcare," end of quote. Among the many items of his planned $11 billion list of program cuts, he would drastically slash funding for the CBC. After all, it was the CBC's meddling that exposed Brian Mulroney's wrongdoings. Brian Mulroney, who under oath testified that he hardly knew Karl-Heinz Schreiber, only to later admit receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash from Karl-Heinz in plain envelopes. And make no mistake, Brian Mulroney is a behind-the-scenes force in this election. On May 2nd, you have the opportunity to elect a new government in Ottawa, an NDP government led by Jack Layton. As a member of his team, I will dedicate myself to your service.
Good evening. I also would like to thank all of the people that made this forum possible. My name is Janine Gibson. I'm here to ask you to think green and vote Janine and tell a friend. Part of my gratitude comes from having lived in Provencher the vast majority of my life and being extremely grateful for being able to be a child, a young woman, and a woman who's been able to lead a very free life here and appreciate the beauty of our resources and the beauty of being raised in the family farm environment. I believe that leading a simpler life, a greener life, consuming less, wasting less, spending less, leads to greener choices and deeper inner peace. For though I'm a woman of education and privilege, I've also known discrimination and violence. And I think that we need a total change. And I know that many of you in Provencher think that it's time for a change. More and more people are telling me, though they may be traditionally conservative and have worked with Mr. Taves, they want to put the conserve back in conservative. And though the Conservatives talk about being a fiscally responsible government, in fact, when you look at what they've actually done and not of what they've said, the story is quite different. It reminds me of a story that I often think of in elections, of the little girl that turns to her grandma and says, "Grandma, do all stories start with once upon a time?" And she says, "No, my dear, many start with, if elected, I promise." So I am wearing a leaf today from the beautiful oak forest in which I live, near Sardo and Pansy, Manitoba. And that forest sustains me in very important ways, as do the 6 key values of the Green Party. So I invite you in more detail to visit the Green Party website, greenparty.ca, to look at the platform that we've put forward on what it means to have a principle of ecological wisdom, of participatory democracy, of sustainability, of social justice, nonviolence, and respect for diversity. And in a culture where we respect the word that we are to love one another, it does not mean just love those you agree with or those that are like you, but it is love one another, all of us. And I think we have to understand that diversity not only in how we relate to each other and how we enforce or not enforce basic human rights in this country, enforce or not enforce democratic principles so that we have a participatory democracy with true transparency. Once again, we have a conservative government that their platform was transparency in government. When you look at what they've actually done over and over again is close the doors. You do not deserve to have that information. You have to pay outrageous amounts of money to get information. So I believe the fundamental principles of our democracy in Canada are at risk because of corporate control. I believe that we can use technology in a smart way to find a way to live closer to nature, which in fact will bring us closer to ourselves and each other, enriching our lives spiritually and culturally. Not spending billions of dollars on fighter jets and billions of dollars on jails. Where are the Christian virtues of mercy and forgiveness? Yes, be hard on the crime, but not on the criminal. Where is the support for spending for basic health care, for prevention of poverty, through adequate support for our education? We need protection from all hate crimes. We need to support youth and people in need. Our social safety net is being destroyed with an alarming lack of transparency. And people are tired of this political hypocrisy. Our Green Party platform supports true democracy, strong communities, and a green economy. I have worked to promote organic agriculture in my home region, a form of food production that is much more sustainable than short-term profits for the few in corporate industrial agriculture. Acres of the forest around my home have been cut down for slurry to be spread. And now my neighbors and myself are suffering from flooding because of a lack of a vision from our federal government all the way down to our local government that preserves our watersheds, that recognizes the incredible wealth that we have in Provencher that needs to be cared for. So with that, I would like to ask you to think green. What is the next step that you can make in your life for a greener life? And please tell a friend, vote green. Thank you.
Merci, Janine. Bonjour. Welcome, folks. It's a very great pleasure for me on my first attempt at being an elected official to stand here before you. So I'm the gray-haired newbie in the crowd. As I said, my name is Terry Hayward. I'm your Liberal candidate, your wannabe member of Parliament. I've only lived in this riding for 20 years. I was able to get here through the great grace of my wife, Donna. She's sitting in the crowd here. My wife of 38 years. She's the one that was born and raised in this neighborhood. We met at University of Manitoba, and as soon as I graduated, we ended up on the road. I joined the Federal Department of Agriculture back in 1973, actually 2 days after we got married. And Donna has stuck through me thick and thin as we've traveled this country and the world. You know, I was very proud as well when we stood up and sang, "O Canada." I think it means something to all of us when we sing it. It gives you a deep pride. For me, sometimes it gives a great tingle down the spine. And no more so than when I'm abroad and when the Canadian flag is being flown and when you can say very proudly, "I am Canadian, je suis Canadien." We raised our family in this riding. We live in Enola, our farm's up there. Thankfully, we're 2 miles inside the riding. It's a big riding, but there are borders. We raised our family here. We came back from, I think it was Ottawa the last time that we were out there. And the boys, we had them in French immersion school in Edmonton when we lived there, and we had them in French immersion in Ottawa when we lived there. We had them in French immersion. Well, we found them with a spot in French immersion in Beausejour when we came back. So the boys had their grandfather as their school bus, and he took them up to school for most of their education. We now have a 2-year-old grandson who comes and stays with us every day. You talk about sandwich generation. It takes 2 of us now to take care of a 2-year-old. But he comes and stays with us through the week because his folks are out there working, helping the economy as fully employed people can be. And it's a great pleasure to have him with us. We also, until just a year ago, had my father-in-law with us. And you talk about family. Okay. Hayward worked all across Canada. I lived and worked I had my family with me as we went to Regina, Saskatoon, Ottawa, Quebec City, Edmonton, and Winnipeg. Internationally, I worked at the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C., where I was First Secretary, Agriculture, Forestry, and Food. And then I got the plum job of my life, a transfer to go to New Zealand. And if you've gone through agriculture and you've studied animal science, New Zealand's a great place to go to. And I was able to go there and represent Canada as a trade commissioner. My last position with the federal government was with the National Farm Products Council. I spent 6 years with them, 6 years commuting from the farm in Enola to Ottawa. We had to take a small apartment there, and I think I own all of Air Canada with what we paid to go back and forth.